Sheri. What kinds of data are useful to have present and at your fingertips for the audit?
Okay, thank you, Becky. I have a list, and it's not comprehensive, but we'll start going through it. PSM applicability documentation. When we first get there, one of the things we want to find out is, why are you covered by PSM? That helps us determine what we're going to look at for the rest of the audit. So it's very helpful to have that applicability documentation readily available. Next will be the corporate and site PSM policies and procedures. PSM is a performance-based standard. So how you implement PSM and how you've decided to do that as an organization should be described in your policies and procedures. So we will use that as we are doing the audit to make sure we understand how you think you are applying it. And that is one of the audit documents. If you're not following your policies and procedures, then there are some additional things that you're going to need to fix within your systems. Next thing is your process hazard analysis, your PHAs. Obviously, that's an element of PSM, but the PHAs are used throughout the system, throughout the audit. They help us understand your safeguards, where your critical equipment is, what kind of recommendations you've had and how you track those, what MOCs have you done, what incidents have you had. So that's a very valuable document to have available to all the auditors as they go through to look at different parts of PSM. Next thing would be the tracking information for your recommendations or action items. Your action items need to be closed in a, they need to be closed in a timely manner. So as an auditor, we're going to be asking to see, how do you track them? How do you make sure they've been closed properly? If they're still open, why are they still open? What are you doing with them? And if they've been closed or rejected, what was your, how did you determine that it could be rejected? What in your policies and procedures tells you can do you can reject certain action items, and what do you do to document that? Next thing would be operating procedures. Obviously, we'll be looking at operating procedures. That's an element. But one of the things that we look at and we look for are the safe operating limits and the consequences of deviation from those safe operating limits, and what operators are supposed to do when they start to deviate from those limits. Next thing, MOCs, PSSRs. We put those together a lot. The PSSR is the pre-startup safety review that you're supposed to do after you make a change to your system. So we're going to look at your management of change process. How do you have it documented? How do you make sure that all the steps are complete and that you complete your PSSRs? PSV documentation, relief valve documentation. It's very important to have the design basis for your relief valves available. And understanding what the reg gap is, that's another thing which is important. And that is your recognized and generally accepted engineering practices. Those are how you decide you're going to keep your design basis and how your plant has been designed. We're going to be looking at design basis for PSVs and for safety systems. And safety systems include interlocks, fire water systems, ventilation systems, fire and gas detection systems, ESDs, safety critical alarms. When you have those in place, there should be a design basis available. So that will be one of the questions that we will be asking for those different systems. The next part of that is, once we understand those systems are available, we will be asking for the inspection and testing data. So when the mechanical integrity auditor is looking at looking for information, they're going to be looking for inspection and testing data. So having that available up front, understanding that you have safety systems and that we will be looking at that inspection and testing data will help you a lot when we get there, because we're not going to spend we won't have to wait for a day or two for you to find that information. And to be honest, we end up having to do that because sometimes people don't realize that fire water systems are actually safety systems. Next thing, as a mechanical integrity auditor, we'll be looking for PSM critical equipment lists. What have you as an organization determined are your PSM critical equipment, is your critical equipment. And the reason that's important is you've identified that probably in a PHA as a safeguard, and we're going to go and make sure that you are testing and inspecting that critical equipment. If that's not defined, that will be something that we'll be asking about and probably will end up with a finding on. So having that information available is very important. Hot work. Having available some completed hot work permits is very helpful. A lot of times there may not be hot work actively going on at the site, but we can look at completed hot work permits to determine what the status of the program is from that. We will be asking for training documentation, making sure that operators and contractors have received the appropriate training for the work that they're doing. We'd like to see it. You can just show it to us. We don't have to have copies, but that is information that should be available to the auditors. P&IDs. Those are a very important part of how the process is mapped out, and what you have as far as the equipment in the site, what your piping is. We'll be looking for specifications for all of that information. Kind of goes back to that design basis. And then last but not least, making sure that you have operations and maintenance personnel lined up to interview. This goes right back to what Judy said earlier. That this is an interactive process. We do go through data, but we also, part of the data is talking to the people that are actually working at the site to make sure we understand their knowledge, and so that we can understand that we know that they know where everything is and what information they bring to the table. And so that would be it. That's some of it. That's not all of it, but that should get us pretty well down the path.
Thank you, Sheri. Does anyone else from the panel want to add anything to that?
I will add one item if that's okay, Becky.
Sure.
Taking one step back, Sheri has talked about lots of different kinds of information, and that information is managed in different ways, different systems at the site. And one of the basic things that the auditors are really going to need are a person or people probably who are very capable, even expert at extracting data from your electronic systems, from your MOC and PSSR system, from your SharePoint, from your incident reporting and investigation system, from your training system, from your maintenance and inspection databases, your drawing system, and all manner of other systems. Your subject matter experts are not always the best, let's call them data miners, and the audit team is going to need people who are expert data miners in all of those systems.
I want to tell a short but a little war story. Back in the 90s, one of the plants that were under my responsibility for as a corporate process safety guy had an incident. It was a simple incident. They were doing some hot work on a pipe rack that went over an ethanol dike, and lo and behold, there was a puddle of ethanol in that dike, and they had some slag that fell down and ignited it and had a fire. They used the local fire department, and the local fire department got paid for whenever they rolled their equipment. And of course, they brought everything, which got OSHA's attention in the news. And so OSHA came knocking. So the first thing the OSHA inspector did when he came in, and I supported the plant, so I was there talking with him. He came in and he asked, well, what chemicals do you have? And they had several on the process safety hit list: flammable, toxics, acrylonitrile, ethylene oxide, methyl chloride, formaldehyde, ethanol, IPA. When the inspector heard ethylene oxide, his ears perked up, and I knew that was going to happen. And he said, I want to see what you got for ethylene oxide. The site, we were in a conference room in an office, and right near that office was the manager's office, who was responsible for process safety. He was the technical manager, and he had a lot of the data in that filing cabinet, and he had it really well organized, and not the mechanical integrity test type stuff, but other things. And so that inspector asked for, I don't know, half a dozen things associated with it: PHA, P&IDs, several other things. And that And he gave us a couple hours to get it. Well, within about 10 minutes, that manager had pulled out all but the test data, which we got within an hour, and laid it in front of the guy. And the guy went through and he said, "You've got it all." And he was really impressed that we could get it so quickly. And that made things go much, much easier. The only thing they got cited for was for the fire watch not doing his job, which was quite correct. The fire watch was doing other stuff, not doing the fire watch job. Had they not been so well organized, I suspect they probably would have had a more difficult time with that inspection and perhaps had more citations. So I can't stress enough, knowing where things are, being organized, and being able to get things quickly for the inspectors really can help you out.
Okay, great.